Okay, welcome back to week 3. We're looking at the fundamentals of ethnic studies a bit deeper. We've been going over the origins of ethnic studies and thinking about the basics or the fundamentals, the kinds of things that make up ethnic studies as a discipline and a discourse. So not just where it started from, but what kinds of questions are they asking? What is their methodology? What are their key investments? We're going to begin with a discussion about that phrase, having a seat at the table. And then I'm going to give you some additional frameworks that aren't covered in your readings. And then we'll talk about the 2 chapters that you were responsible to read. So if you look at this slide, you see the seat at the table, you see a table with a group of diverse cartoon or animated people, and each of them are putting into the puzzle, right? There's a solid blue puzzle in the middle, and each of them has a piece that actually fits into that puzzle. So I want us to think about a seat at the table, or that analogy of having a seat at the table. When we think about what it means to have a multidisciplinary discourse like this, where people are all involved in the decision making, so then they are a part of the power structure, I want us to think about how there are different lenses or ways of approaching this particular concept, seat at the table, and thereby helping you think about the different ways that ethnic studies offers a multidisciplinary, pluralistic kind of approach to how it understands experiences of the world or social discourse in society, particularly in the US. So one of the earliest references to the table is from a Langston Hughes poem called I Too, that was published in 1926. Langston Hughes is a notable Black author, playwright, fiction writer, and novelist. He is renowned for the work that he did for capturing the actual lived experiences of Black people in his writing. One of the stanzas reads, "Tomorrow, I'll be at the table. When company comes, nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen." It is a poem about belonging. It's about being a part of a national identity. The first line is, "I too sing America," right? The next line is, "I am the darker brother." So he is thinking or making a claim, not just about belonging, but about kinship, about being connected to this larger national identity. And if you think about what Hugh Duhart wrote in her reading or in her text, if you think about what she wrote about the United States national identity being white, and that ethnic identities tend to be unmeltable, we can think about why people of color want to try to get into the fold and what that looks like. Ethnic studies helps us to think about what that looks like from the different lenses or perspectives. Later, some 40 or so years later, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm uses the quote when she says, and she says this a number of times, "If you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair," right? Just a little back information about Shirley Chisholm. She was the second ever Black person to sit on the New York State Legislature in 1964. And in 1968, she won a seat in Congress. And then she became the first woman and Black person to seek nomination for presidency in the United States. She's a very, very interesting figure, or most people know very little about her. She's worth your investigating. When Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm is evoking the seat at the table metaphor, she is in many ways challenging the notion of national belonging as something that should be bestowed by someone else. So in Hughes's poem, national belonging is gifted to the darker brother, right? In Chisholm's statement, It's something that isn't meant to be given. And her stance, she's being more disruptive, less patient, if you will. It is about pushing or forcing your way into a position of belonging because you inherently belong there, right? We are Americans. We are of this national identity, even when not recognized as such through the laws, and through the actions of this country. We actually do belong here. So she's insisting on forcing that position. And when you're in that position of belonging, when you have a seat at the table, then you have the possibility of making decisions about your life and the lives of those that you're invested in, right? Seat at the table is a very, very common quote. It's even been used in Solange Knowles as the title of her 19 as the title of her 2016 studio album. And that studio album is very much a rebellious and complex album centering on the full spectrum of Black emotion. People often evoke that notion of being a seat at or having a seat at the table in order to complicate our thoughts or trigger our thoughts about power. In more recent years, there has been a critical repurposing of the phrase that suggests that if you are not at the table, you could perhaps be, and usually are, on the menu. If there's a table, the assumption is there is something below the table or something that's being served up on the table. If you have a seat at the table, the quote goes, if you have a seat at the table, then who's on the menu? At the core, the table is about power, right? In all of these instantiations, it's about having a position of decision making, of being included in a position of power. And this is where I want us to think about this analogy and think about the various positionalities for thinking about belonging, right? The various lenses through which ethnic studies is trying to uncover how we are articulating our belonging. And in some of it, we're being very disruptive about it, and some of it, we're trying to offer some more inclusive analysis. So this is by no means an exhaustive or even fully nuanced lens. This is a very basic way of thinking about this analogy through these different perspectives. So a supremacist says of the table that the table rightfully belongs to them, right? This table is rightfully ours because we are inherently biologically superior. And as such, not only do we rule the table, but we rule all those on the menu, right? And if they don't comply, they can be eradicated, right? Segregationists are saying this is our table, and go figure out your own table. Go make yourself an equal table, but you can't sit at this table. You can't be on this in this position of power. Integrationalists or assimilationists say that we have a lot to offer to your table, right? It's about being folded into. So if you would please make room for us, see us as worthy enough to be a part of this dialogue, to be in this position of power, we will conform to the rules and conditions that exist at this table, if that makes sense. So a progressive or liberal lens would say the best representation or the best way to make the table is to make the table in a very diverse way. And that's kind of what we see here. We see these different color animated figures, people figures, and they all have some input for this table, right? A progressive or liberal approach would not just say, let's make space at the table, but by doing so, we can make things both equal and equitable. Equal meaning that everyone gets the same share of power. Everyone has equal input into it. Equitability means that for those who have had to travel the furthest to get to the table, we should offer some additional help to get them there, right? So we're asking that all of the power be distributed equally and that we assist those so that they can meet at the table and be a part of the power structure. A decolonialist would say the fact that this table exists, right? And the fact even that there is a centerpiece in the table that coincides with a dominant ideology is a problem. So you see there's a blue figure here, and there is the matching blue puzzle piece. So then the blue figure has the majority of the say in the analogy. Decolonialists say the fact that this table exists, the fact that there is this kind of structure means that it's serving a dominant power in the first place. It exists within a framework of power, white supremacy or colonial power. And so they're questioning not just the table, not just the menu, but the table itself, what it's standing on, what it represents, right? And a decolonialist would say, we need to break up the center puzzle. We need to decolonize even the shape, structure, and whether we should be at a table in the first place. Like whether this setup is the setup for us to have in the first place. A decolonial approach is an approach that is anti whatever this traditional kind of methodology is. A radical revolutionary says that we must gain control of the table and fundamentally transform it so that it can be more inclusive. And that may mean breaking some pieces off, disrupting some things, right? But it still, in essence, at its core, represents this table that already existed. Pessimists say that the table, the chairs, everyone in the table, everything on the menu, all needs to be destroyed, right? That these all exist in a fundamental antagonism or in a fundamental conflict that cannot be resolved. And as such, we should dissolve, the whole thing has to be dissolved in order for there to be any sense of real equality or liberation, right? That there's no such thing without the destruction of everything. Social ethnic studies allows us to critically engage, analyze, and critique the various lenses through which disciplines come to understand power or be in relation to structural institutional forms of domination, social political forms of power that impact the lives of everyone, not just people of color, but white people are in fact impacted by the same kinds of conditions of power. It looks differently though.